right, so welcome people of YouTube. If you are listening on my podcast or Patreon, and you can also see me. But if not, and you're listening on Spotify, I am Lexi. I am your host for Lexi's Nook. This is my booktube right here, or if you're listening on Patreon or on Spotify, this is my book podcast where we're going to talk about all about books, book reviews, and discussions, and go over some book club picks, such as a couple of book clubs I'm a part of and Reese Witherspoon's book club. So for this week, or not this week, we're not having a regular scheduled episode. Instead, I'm going to go along sometimes with certain audiobooks that I just happen to read, are recommended to me, they're on my TBR list, whether they're a book or audiobook, or they're part of a challenge, reading challenge that someone has recommended to me or has been gifted to me. But for today's episode, we're going to be talking about an audiobook called A Confederacy of Dunces, or Dunces. I might have pronounced that wrong. So it's an audiobook. I don't have like a physical copy of it, but I do have a picture, but it's very silly. This audiobook is a fun one. It's like a comedy, but to give you a description or a picture of it, I'm going to show you a picture of it on YouTube and Patreon if you can see it. There's a little bit of a glare, but it shows the main character Ignatius on it, and he's in the city of New Orleans during the 1960s. So the story follows Ignatius, who is in his 30s. He lives with his mom, and he has never really held down a job. He's never been faced with reality and learn how to adult and do certain things and get by in the world. So this story follows him and how he gets a job and can't hold it, and the adventures and situations that he gets himself stuck into, and he's not able to hold down a job. And it's funny because of all the situations he finds himself in, but they're not really anything serious. He's just lazy. He's a larger man. He's described as obese. He's very flatulent. He has GI issues. So there's a lot of funny sounds during the audiobook. The narrator did an excellent job, and there are characters that he meets throughout his, past few months or a year, however long this takes, that the people he interacts with are definitely more mature, but they still have these quirky personalities, and they're just very funny, and the narrator makes very funny noises too. So I'm just going to go over a few questions, but I will have to pause this. Hello? Hello? It's what you freaks with. Okay, what's your today? What? Oh, you can tell me. Okay. It's okay. Sorry for that short little break. That was my mom. She is visiting me with my younger sister who can't make it to my book nook for this weekend's homecoming party. So she is coming to see this in the condo, of course. So they're visiting and bringing food. So sorry for that little small break. I was ordering dinner. But anyway, we were getting on to the questions on the audiobook, A Confederacy of Dunces. And so these aren't very deep, meaningful questions, but these are just a few that might spur your thinking. And if you have questions for me that you want me to answer in a later episode, like a part 2, you can send them to me. My website check out my contact information. I do have a personal email. So go check out lexisbooknook.com if you want to contact me and you want to send me additional questions, and I can answer them in a part 2 episode. But we're going to start with 5 questions that I found online and kind of thought of myself and gave my own answers for. So the first one is, in the first chapter of A Confederacy of Dunces is generally thought to be among the funniest in American literature. And do you agree? So I do have some narration in here that I typed out just to get my juices flowing and thoughts, and give you my answer without being totally like dumbstruck and tongue-tied. But I did think that this first chapter was definitely one of the funniest things I've ever listened to, or maybe in literature history. But that's quite a bold statement. But I think it was so funny because of all the noises that the narrator used. Ignatius is described as having like gastrointestinal issues and having parts of his stomach being clogged up, like his sphincter is closed, he can't release his gas, he's very bloated, he has to lie down. So there are a lot of fart noises. So if you're a guy, I'm sure you will love hearing that. Some girls will be like, ew, but I thought it was very funny. I love the noises. I love how the narrator was able to give off those noises and make it seem realistic, but also just very silly and hilarious. But yeah, can't think of another book or audiobook that was this funny, especially in the first chapter. The next question is, the introduction uses the words gargantuan and Falstaffian to describe Ignatius. Is it only his size that makes Ignatius seem larger than life? And so I don't really like the wording on this question to make him seem larger than life, because that's not the impression that I get from Ignatius. Because if I would consider someone larger than life, there'll be more descriptions that also reflect on their personality and what makes them so big and powerful and bold, or maybe even arrogant. But those words, gargantuan and Falstaffian, for Ignatius, I just thought he was obese. He was big. He has very little muscle, more fat to his composition than anything. But yeah, I don't really think of him as larger than life. I don't think him as a very like big character outside of his physical appearance. And based on the narrator, I think it was Walker Percy was his name. He used words to describe Ignatius to imply that he gets ill very easily and is lazy and depend on other people. So I just associate that with obesity and poor health. So I didn't think of him as gargantuan and Falstaffian and other ways. The next question is, Ignatius is a virgin. Yeah, you heard me right. But Myrna, Ignatius' closest thing to a love interest, declares herself to be sexually uninhibited. Is each telling the truth? Can you see them becoming intimate? So, I think they are both telling the truth. There's no reason for anybody to lie about their sexual status or their sex life other than pride. But I don't really get that impression from Ignatius. And we don't really know Myrna super well in the story. But I mean, I could believe that for her because she's more well established as an adult. She's probably more successful. She seems more personable than him, a little more likable. But for Ignatius to admit that he is a virgin, I believe it. I mean, he's described as obese and lazy and dependent. So for him to say that he was not a virgin, I would be surprised, and I would think he would be lying. But that just gives off that stereotypical idea. So if you're listening to this and you're offended, I'm really, really sorry. I don't want to put that stigmatism on larger people. I'm a dietitian, and I think every size is beautiful, but that's a whole other story. But when it comes down to the story, I do think Ignatius is telling the truth that he's a virgin, just based off the descriptions the narrator gave. So sorry for that long-winded answer and going into a different topic, but we are not going to go there because this is a book nook, book review, talking about books, podcast, and booktube. So, in a nutshell, I think they're both telling the truth. The next question is Ignatius purely lazy, or does his attitude toward work reflect his disdain for the modern world of commerce? So I think there's a little bit of both, but I think it's mostly laziness, in my opinion. Ignatius is both lazy and cynical about the modern world, and it's to a point that even his mother thinks that he's a communist. But Ignatius does take offense to that, so I think he does have some cynicism and disdain, but I don't think that's 100% why he doesn't have a good work ethic or can stick with the job longer than usual. But so I think he's just mostly lazy. And then the last question I want to share, number 5, is A Confederacy of Dunces is a humor book. Do themes matter in a book like this? For that matter, are there themes, or is the whole thing just a bunch of silliness? So down to the more serious question, and I wanted to end on a little heavier note so you can think about, is this really just a comedy? Is it just really silly? Can it be taken seriously? And I think yes. I think every book has themes, they have a lesson to learn, and even if it doesn't, then it's something that should be a standalone kind of book, so that it could be a story to tell later. But for this comedy book, I do think there are themes, because it denotes the importance of it, even though it sounds a little silly, but it also leaves an impact for me. So the themes that I thought of left an impact, in my opinion, on this audiobook. So I felt like the themes that I could bring out of the story include maturity. How do you mature from 20s to your 30s and later in life, and that journey from each stage? The importance of growing up, moving out of your parents' house, working at a job and holding down a job, and how to create relationships. So I kind of touched on all of those things already throughout these 5 questions, but I think those are very important things that any adult should be faced with. Even if a teenager is listening to this and you're like, oh, this has nothing to do with me, it's all about growing up. But it's very real, and we have to face these facts, unfortunately, because adulting is important and we need to get by in this life. We could rely on others if we want, but that might not be what everyone wants to do. We may not want to rely on our mom and dad. I know I still enjoy it when I can, but I do live alone, so I like having that independence. So if any teenager is listening to this and thinks this has nothing to do with me, well, think about, do I want to move out of my house? Do I want to get some independence from my parents? Do I want to find my dream job? Do I want to work long term, or do I want to have relationships outside of my mom or my dad and forming intimate relationships? And I would think for most people, the answer would be yes to most of those questions. So even if you're 13, 18, or adult listening or watching this video, I think these things can be very relatable to anybody. So that is a little bit of a heavier question. I just wanted to have a quick episode, a pop-up episode on A Confederacy of Dunces, and answer a few questions. I might have more pop-up episodes, and I'll find maybe 3 to 5 discussion questions and answer them. They might be part of reading challenges or something for fun again. If you want to recommend a book or an audiobook, feel free to send it to me. Again, check out lexisbooknook.com to find contact information, and I will try to get through as much as I can. As you see, I have my little book nook, and I have a lot of books that I want to read. I have a lot of projects. By the end of the month, there will be a regular scheduled episode on the January books that I have picked. If you don't know what those are, go back to my first episode. This is only episode 2, so you don't have to go very far. And you can just listen to what those book picks are. If you want to send me discussion questions to answer for the next episode, go ahead and send them to me. I do have some questions already ready. I'm just listening to my last audiobook. The rest are done. So that last episode will be posted by the end of the month. And then on the very beginning of February will be another quick episode on the books that I'll be reading in February. So if you want to get in touch with me, again, come find me on my website, lexisbooknook.com, all one word. and reach out. Otherwise, I hope you have wonderful people, have a wonderful night, enjoy your books, audiobooks, and just keep on reading.